When you look at this slide, you see that it says the best coffee for the best you. How do you know if drinking Starbucks coffee makes you the best you? Or how do you know that it doesn't? How do you know that coffee doesn't make you the best you just as long as you drink Starbucks coffee? There's a reason that you know this. There's a reason you know that drinking Starbucks coffee doesn't make you the best you. You don't just believe the ad, so why don't you just believe it? How about this one? Perhaps it's a little more extreme, but here it says feeding kids meat is child abuse. What is it about the ad that maybe you look for first? Maybe you look for who's making the ad. Maybe you look to see, well, gee, what person says that, or is that really true, or do I believe that right away? But if you look at who has made the ad, it's PETA. PETA is a protection against animals, and it's an organization that's pretty radical in its protection against animals. So that explains the ad. So that might be when you look at that, you say to yourself, oh, well, that's just PETA. So you have an understanding as to why they would put out such an ad. You don't necessarily believe it right away. Well, what this is this is your intellectual wellness. This is your ability, because of things that you know, to look at things and decide and say to yourself, you know what? I don't believe everything that I see. I don't believe everything that I hear, because you have past experiences. You have ways that you know how to look at things critically, how to look at things and not necessarily dive right in and believe everything you hear. Or you have trusted sources. You have people that you do believe, people that you do trust. But that's based on experience. But that's part of your intellectual wellness. In this chapter, we're going to look at these areas that make up your intellectual wellness: influences on behavior, critical thinking, creative thinking, bolstering work memory, learning style, multiple intelligence, practicing mindfulness. So, what is intellectual wellness? Well, it's one's creativity and engagement with stimulating mental activities. Yeah, this is the slide that we always look at. It has a little bit here that you can glean from it. But what you see here is, if you look at that third bullet point, it's problem solving. It's how you open your mind to new ideas, how you witness new thoughts and cultures. All these things shape your intellectual wellness. A better definition is assimilating what you learn in the classroom with what you experience outside the classroom. Positively enhances your potential for living a more fulfilling life. Your intellectual wellness really is built around everything you've experienced thus far, not only in a classroom, but outside. And some could argue which one of those has been most important, but certainly both of them have played a factor. One of the biggest parts of your intellectual wellness is your critical thinking skills. And this is something that gets said a lot, especially to many of you that might have gone to school here in the United States. High schools love to use critical thinking questions or ways that they think they're going to enhance your critical thinking. Focus in on what's in purple here. Reasoning is used in pursuit of the truth. In other words, you know what you know from your past experiences, and thus you can give thought to when you see something. And maybe sometimes it's quickly dismissed, like the idea that drinking Starbucks coffee is the only way to be the best you, or maybe it's something that takes a bit more thought, something that takes a bit more of your time to take a look at, see what you like, dislike, what you believe, don't believe. So critical thinking, two main ideas presented are that humans make decisions based more on emotions than anything else, and the political advertising is designed to arouse emotions, not reason. And this is a great slide because of our current climate. We're seeing all kinds of things about not only the coronavirus, but of course the Democratic Party primaries are going on. And so you've seen all kinds of things based around those politics. And you have to decide, well, what do you believe? What do you not believe? What's being said? You've heard the idea of fake news, of course, has been a vocabulary word that came out a couple years ago with political elections. And so there's no doubt that that helps us look towards what our critical thinking skills are. The behavioral approach system activated by positive words, images, sounds, music, backdrop, tone of voice, etc., and the behavioral inhibition system activated by negative words, images, sounds, music, backdrop, tone of voice, etc. These are all what we would call our dual systems of emotional processing. How do we deal with these emotions? How does it affect our critical thinking? The dual systems, if you see here, points 1 and 2, provide internal checks and balances, leading to pursuit of enjoyable activities, put on the brakes when individuals are about to get themselves into trouble. These are things that we all see with our critical thinking skills. Through media literacy, you learn to answer 5 essential questions. Who created this message? So when you look back at my ad that I showed you about eating meat or feeding your children meat is child abuse, the first thing you should ask yourself is, well, who created this message? What have they done in this message to try and make me believe it? Well, they've got a close-up picture of a young boy that's eating a cheeseburger or a hamburger. And so immediately some of you, probably those of you that eat meat, might get super defensive and say that's ridiculous. Maybe some of you that are vegetarians or vegans might say that's exactly right. You might agree with them. Again, lifestyle, how you've been raised, what your thought process is, all those affect your critical thinking skills. Recognizing fallacies. What are patterns that get us into trouble, right? Well, oftentimes if information comes from an authority figure, we oftentimes believe, okay, yep, hey, that's correct because that person knows what they're talking about. We jump to conclusions. Certainly something that's done with social media. Make false generalizations. Again, social media. Attack the person. Appeal to common belief. Appeal to common practice. Appeal to tradition. 2 wrongs. We oftentimes say to ourselves, oh, well, it's acceptable because everyone else is doing it. Domino theory, look at the consequences and so forth, wishful thinking. Appeal to loyalty. We do that with our friends even when we don't think we are. Different prejudice that we have, whether we're a strong man, strong woman, viruses, and so forth. Okay, so critical thinking. This involves asking yourself why and using divergent thinking, ability to discover many alternatives. So when we see something that requires us to be an effective critical thinker, do we then go into a series of things to ask ourselves? Okay? And along those lines becomes then creative thinking. Creative thinking is involved in this as well. So we have to ask ourselves, not only can we be critical thinkers, but can we be creative thinkers? There's some techniques to being a creative thinker, right? Brainstorming, you know what that is. Brainstorming, can we think of all the possibilities? Relaxed attention. Use idea files. Keep files or ideas that you find interesting, also known as swipe files. Practice using visualization, imagination. Make reading a habit. One of the best ways to trigger your creativity is to read. Keep a journal. Many of you probably do keep journals. Think critically. Critical and creative thinkers ask questions, right? Also, to be a creative thinker, we have to acquire wisdom and knowledge. We have to learn. We have to continue to learn. We have to try and keep an open mind. We have to understand that not everybody thinks the same way we do. Now, one of the things that probably impacts our ability to become critical thinkers and our ability to become creative thinkers is how we learn. How do we gain our information? Each of us learns a little differently, and many of us probably are similar in how we learn because of our upbringings or because of where we're from or because of how we've been taught when we were little, so we've trained ourselves to learn in certain ways. Others, maybe not the case. When we look at learning style and intelligence, we look at a lot of different ways that people learn. Some people learn better in a group. Some people don't learn as well in a group. Some people are much better in the morning. Some people are much better in the afternoon. Some people learn better when they're in a quiet room. Some people don't need quiet. Some people need strict and structure. Some people do not. One thing we try to do is we try to classify learners. People sometimes are visual learners. I myself am probably more visual than I am auditory. I'm probably more kinesthetic. In other words, I learn by by movement. Learning by smell, learning through taste. Okay, those are things that we've heard before, but probably not necessarily a learning style that a lot of us think about. Okay. Here's an example quiz that you could take that I threw in the notes here. This is not part of the notes for the class. This is a Mahoneyism, if you would. Take the time. You can pause this and take the time and write down your responses here, 1, 2, or 3, whether it applies to you. So if you look at number 10, it says it's better for me to get work done in a quiet place. If that's definitely you, it often applies to me, you know, that's a 3. So you would put a 3. Then when you get done, you take a total. Then the next slide's the same thing. Do the same thing. Take the time, pause the video here, number 1 to 10, 1, 2, and 3, which one applies to you, and so forth. Sometimes applies, often applies, never applies. Mix, put those down, how each of them are for you, okay? And then the third one is, again, number 1 to 10. And label 1, 2, or 3, just like before. 3 often applies to me. And again, once you get done, get a total. Get a total. Then, section 1 score, if you have a 20, okay, the maximum score in each section is 30 and the minimum score is 10. So if you have a 20 in section 1, then you're probably a visual learner. If you have a score of 13 or higher in section 2, you're auditory learner. If you have a score of 17 or higher in section 3, then you're a kinesthetic learner. Here's the cool thing. Many of you probably scored higher than those numbers in 2 categories, which probably means you learn in 2 different ways. Like I said before, I learn as a visual learner and probably a kinesthetic learner much more than I do an auditory. So for me, I would score, and I have scored when I take this, I score higher than 20 in visual and I score higher than 17 in kinesthetic. That's okay. Very rarely do you have someone who scores high in all 3 of those, but there's probably one of you that does. This gives you an idea of how you learn.